Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We're excited for the afternoon sessions. When we were organizing this conference, the ENIGMA IPV working group and Pink Concussions, as well as our organizing committee, felt very strongly that we wanted to make sure that we gave space and had a voice for our trainees working in IPV brain injury research. So we have two sessions within the conference set up for the trainee data blitz. So now I'm excited to introduce Katie Dorman, who is going to be the moderator for the first trainee data blitz. Katie?
Thank you. So for the first trainee data blitz, we have Rory A. Marshall. He is a PhD candidate at the School of Health and Exercise Sciences and the Faculty of Health and Social Development at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, and a paramedic working with Alberta Health Services and British Columbia Emergency Health Services, respectively. Rory earned his bachelor's degree in kinesiology and business at Vancouver Island University and his master's degree in biomedical sciences at the University of Saskatchewan. He has also had international paramedic experience practicing in New Zealand and Central America. Rory's research interests include intimate partner violence caused brain injury, paramedicine, and resuscitation. Rory is a senior fellow at the McNally Project for Paramedic Research. Today, he will be presenting on Canadian First Responders Falling Behind, Paramedics Missing the Connection Between Intimate Partner Violence and Brain Injury. Thank you, Rory.
Awesome. Good. Can everyone see that there?
Yes.
It's on the right way around. Perfect. Okay, thank you for the introduction, Katie, and thank you for attending everyone today. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the awesome work we've been doing at UBC Okanagan. So just a quick run through. I'm going to do a quick introduction into my work and kind of the area that we're looking at, then get through some objectives, so what we'd like to get at through this research that we've been doing, and then the methods, so how we're going to respond to those objectives, the results, what the method showed, some discussion around what we found and what we hope to do next, and then some key points, some major takeaways. And I should mention that all the images in this slideshow are from stock or stage photos, so none of these are real events. So intimate partner violence, it's great to have a conference where we don't have to introduce this topic and be the only speaker there, so it's fantastic to be part of this audience today. Intimate partner violence causes brain injury, even more specific, as we've heard from all the other awesome speakers this morning. Very common occurrence, super high prevalence in intimate partner violence. Something that I'll reiterate again is that intimate partner violence is often cyclic, so it keeps happening and escalating. It keeps getting worse, and that has major health consequences. So when we think about these health consequences, it really has been a shift in how we've been thinking about intimate partner violence, and it's a health issue as well now. It's been long recognized as a criminal issue and a social issue, but if we really take this stance as a health issue, I think it really changes the conversation around intimate partner violence. Now, one way that people access the healthcare system is through emergency medical services, so paramedics, EHS, EMS. And given the shortage of doctors, access to healthcare, things like that, this is happening more and more often. Now, paramedics are often attending situations of IPV, although there's no literature supporting this, but clinically, and if you ask any paramedic, they've been on these calls, they know this. Now in Canada, we're governed by the Paramedic Association of Canada, and unfortunately, this is where we start to fall behind. So there's no educational standard for paramedics around intimate partner violence, no vocational standard, so no work level that we have to attain. And then there's no goals of care corresponding to those previous few points. So there's no guidance at all. This leaves the care received by survivors when they're accessing healthcare via EMS really varied and likely really medic dependent. So depending on which paramedic you get that day depends on how your care will likely be. Now, EMS has a really good opportunity to support survivors. We're in people's homes, so we have a really in-depth look into their life. We have a 1-to-1 patient ratio instead of the 20-to-1, 30-to-1, 40-to-1 that we're seeing in the emerge constantly. We have a lot of versatile pathways that are emerging and developing actively, so different ways to maneuver through the healthcare system beyond just going straight to the emergency department. We can facilitate access to that system, And a really big part of that is we're the first point of contact for a lot of folks, and we can really affect their last piece or their outcomes, depending on how we position them to move through the system. So we're really uniquely positioned if you take all those things together to support survivors. The problem is there's a lot of gaps for EMS around intimate partner violence. So our training is a huge gap. Our infrastructure behind supporting survivors is a huge gap. The culture and the shift in EMS mindset is a huge gap. EMS is really good at adjusting physiological values, blood pressure too high, blood pressure too low. But the ongoing shift in how healthcare is being used is we have to expand beyond that. So we also are unsure if there's a gap for EMS awareness around the health consequences and specifically of intimate partner violence caused brain injury. So if we look at the objectives, we want to start to bridge some of these gaps. We wanted to characterize the readiness of paramedics to encounter patients experiencing intimate partner violence. We want to assess what contributes to paramedic readiness. So what experiences paramedics have that impact their ability to support patients. And then we want to look at the knowledge of intimate partner violence compared to intimate partner violence caused brain injury and see if that link is currently there in Canadian EMS. So to do this, we used an anonymous online survey, 7-point Likert scale. So disagree being a score of 1 or strongly disagree, and strongly agree being a score of 7, and then that range across the middle there. So we use the readiness to encounter patients experiencing partner abuse scale, or the READY scale developed by Simon Sawyer in Australia to look at how ready healthcare providers are to encounter patients experiencing violence. This is made up of 4 domains. So there's 15 questions about self-efficacy, 5 about emotional readiness, 5 about motivational readiness, 5 about IPV knowledge. And that all makes up the total score of total readiness. Then we used an expert panel to develop intimate partner violence caused brain injury questions and developed a knowledge scale there. And we also collected demographic information relating to personal and professional competencies. So for the analysis, we did descriptive statistics, so to just kind of find averages, means, and sums of things to get at that first objective. We used a Mancova, so looking at multiple independent variables and how those would affect those outcomes of the Likert scale. So we looked at gender, intimate partner violence experience, and it's really important to note here that that experience is not specifically having experienced violence, just any familiarity with intimate partner violence. So a family member, additional education, all those kind of things. And then hours of education on intimate partner violence specifically. We also did a Welch's t-test looking at intimate partner violence versus intimate partner violence caused brain injury. So thinking of our respondents, I will just go through this quickly. On the professional side, they're mostly basic life support paramedics, mostly full-time, working in metropolitan areas, so over 100,000 people, with about 14 years experience or service, and had about 2 hours of training in their paramedic education, which was higher than we thought, and about 2.5 hours of training within their ambulance services. On the personal side, respondents were typically 41 years old, had 70% roughly had less than a bachelor's degree of education. About 70% also had no experience with IPV. 48% were women, which is significantly higher than what we would see in the workforce typically. 99% were cisgender, most were European, and most were Caucasian. So now if we move into the results, we'll start with total readiness. So we had an average score of 5.4, you can see outlined by that blue line. So this is, if you encompass those 4 competencies below, this is the average score that encompasses total readiness. So 7 being the best possible score and 1 being the worst. You can see 5.4 is not too bad. But then if we get into self-efficacy as a subcomponent, that score is 4.9. So now we're starting to see a bit of a drop off. In emotional readiness, we're looking at the same thing. And then if we go to motivational readiness, we're looking at a really high 6.5 score. And then again with knowledge, a quite high score here of 6.0. So overall, paramedic readiness to encounter patients is not too bad. And then if we look at the independent variables, so what factors play into those scores, we wanted to see if gender, IPV experience, and hours of education played into it. And then we accounted for with covariates all these other things. So license level, practice size, which province they worked in, and then the personal factors we collected: race, ethnicity, and age. And to summarize that all, none of our covariates had any effect. So we didn't see an impact when we broke it down and accounted for that. We did see a few main effects. So we saw a main effect of IPV education, a main effect of IPV experience, but no main effect of gender. So to summarize all this, because there's a lot more that we could go into from this, but I'll just make it very brief. More hours of IPV education as a professional competency, or having previous experience with intimate partner violence, were shown to improve readiness. So then, if we get at our last objective here, looking at IPV knowledge versus IPV-BI knowledge. IPV knowledge, again, this will look familiar from the previous graph. That's 6.0, so fairly good, all things considered, considering our lack of competencies. But IPV-BI knowledge, 4.4. So if we look at that gap, and I want to really just take a moment to look at the big distinction here between those 2 points. But that gap was significant. And then just one more final piece. We did ask if paramedics would like additional education in this. 96% agreed they would. Only 4% were neutral or disagreed. So overall, paramedic readiness was fairly good, but there are some gaps. Education and intimate partner violence experience had a positive effect, but that means that the care you get is likely really medic dependent, as we suspected. There's a really distinct disconnect between intimate partner violence and traumatic brain injury, and that's a really key gap. Now, our next steps in this work, we're looking to do interviews with survivors to gather their experience. We're looking to do paramedic interviews to gather their experience. We're looking to combine all that information and look at guidance for EMS in general in Canada. And then after that, I've called that the postdoc line, we're looking to action that into tangible benefits for survivors. So some key points, this is my last slide here. Paramedics are uniquely situated to support survivors of intimate partner violence. Paramedic readiness to encounter survivors is typically not bad, but we still need further educational, vocational, and care standards. There's a huge disconnect between intimate partner violence and traumatic brain injury amongst paramedics, and this means that the care they're receiving, even if the intimate partner violence care and that standard appears all right, is likely not adequate because it doesn't account for that brain injury piece, which is a huge part of the puzzle. More work's needed to enhance that and kind of bridge that gap, and we need feasible pathways to support survivors. But ending on a positive note, there is that big internal desire for change, which is really positive to see in EMS. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for that talk, Rory. That was extremely interesting, and I'm very grateful for the work you're doing. If anyone has any questions for Rory, you could put those in the Q&A. And Rory, if you want to answer them if they come up now or just within the Q&A throughout the day. And then Rory, I know Rachel asked you a question if you want to address that to everyone as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Rachel asked if we thought about EMS being a starting point for access to resources and education in that different setting. And that's a really good point. I know there's been a big push lately for kind of universal education, not just violence response, access to resources, and kind of a preemptive, proactive approach. And I think that's a really great place to start. In Canadian EMS currently, we're so far, and probably EMS in general, behind the 8 ball, that we're just trying to first identify that there is a problem and then start to employ, which, I mean, there obviously is, but we need everybody to know. And then trying to employ methods like the use of the guides, like the one Rachel's provided an awesome example of there, to support survivors, and just kind of working through it that way. But yeah, definitely, if EMS could become a resource for survivors and just people in general, that would be phenomenal.
Great, thank you. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and Divya and Rory will be answering those. And we will be moving on to a talk given by Dr. Doms O'Connor in about 1 minute. Thank you.